Okay, the subject today is vitamin D deficiency and transdermal magnesium. So, a lot of people talk about the biggest deficiency in the world being vitamin D deficiency, but actually it's magnesium deficiency, but whatever. I mean, they're both high up, right? And they've been around for a while and they're not really budging either. We're still stuck in these two deficiencies now. Why is that? So we know that the foods are refined, there's less of the magnesium, even in the foods that are amazing and the most organic and the best ever. Well, we compare those same best ever foods to, 100 years ago, and then we got all the magnesium pulled out of them. So magnesium is a factor in composting, and about 1%, if that, of farms in America use compost. So we're at a very low level, or maybe that's a worldwide number, 1%, but I doubt it. I think it's Western Europe or America, but it's a very low percentage of people using compost and refilling that magnesium back into the soil in the right way, of course, not just like throwing a bunch of, salts on there and being like, so that doesn't work either. And so trying to do this right and figure out the deficiencies, because the deficiencies, they work together. And so if you can't, they've done studies showing that when you have the magnesium deficiency overcome and high levels, optimal levels of intercellular magnesium, then you have higher reabsorption rates and utilization and efficiency rates of the using of the vitamin D hormone. So everything kind of comes back into balance. When one is up, then the other one, it's not, at least with magnesium and vitamin D. Now, with vitamin A and vitamin D, there's an antagonism if you have too much of one without the other. And that's why this isolated vitamin D prescription madness is can be dangerous, because we're throwing off that balance. But when it comes to magnesium, it's different. It says magnesium being so ubiquitous at all the magnesium dependent enzymes and the functions from the phospholipids, which make up the cell membrane, and all that membrane transport. I mean, that's pretty much the life of the organism, all the getting into the cell, the nutrients and all this stuff. I mean, that's such a master piece of the puzzle, cellular exchange or whatever. And so that doesn't have that effect, right? That is actually we're mostly limited by the lack of magnesium. So it's the limiting factor, you could say, in a lot of these other things. And there's a lot of etiology that point to certain disease etiology, and inflammation of the membranes, and certain flux of cell membranes and things that correspond to magnesium deficiency that also correspond to cancer. Exactly. So you'll see some of these same things happening when the body is magnesium deficient as you have in disease etiology. So, and I'm not a doctor, I'm a naturopath, but I have common sense, and I do a lot of research, and I try to figure out. I believe that a lot of the best, breakthroughs do not come from consensus. They do not come from a whole group. They usually come from one individual, one person breaking through. And so I believe that some of those breakthroughs don't just happen through logic alone. I think there's a little bit of intuition and revelation, or whatever you want to call that, some sort of intuition that, heart mind, I guess. I kind of think of Goethe as a master scientist in this regard, philosopher slash scientist, not overly specified, but at the same time keeping things back into the center and helping us to see this, helping us understand things from a more human level than just the mechanics, which is very important, because it's in some sense it's complex, but in another sense you can get lost in it. It can be a smokescreen from something very simple and true. So sometimes you can read a million studies, and then if we even exclude the fact that they could be biased, because who funded them, right? And that's been well documented by even the editor of the Lancet himself said that 50% of the studies were biased. And so now, I mean, we know anyway, right? We should have known anyway, but going through all of that, that's not the difficulty. It's proving these things scientifically has some level of intensity and power, and that's a good thing. But being able to read 20 or 30 studies all in a given period, and being able to surmise what magnesium or its function really is underneath all of that, like as something that preserves, something viscous, and what it's doing in that to create what it's creating. This kind of common denominator simplification, this is very difficult, and it takes not just logic, it takes a type of seeing that is important when you're able to see a lot of different patterns, and so there's something interesting there. Now, I don't want to get lost in what that is. I'll try to explain that to you. But so just looking at this little sheet that I made a couple notes on vitamin deficiency. So, everything is happening in the skin, right? So you have the vitamin D is created in the skin, and so is the transdermal magnesium, for example, is also through bathing, thalassotherapy, thermal cures, all this stuff. We're bringing this magnesium through the skin too, into the hair follicles and everything else. These follicles were also made for that, so they also absorb, and the skin itself absorbs. I mean, it's not, it's selectively permeable, but it has an intelligence to it. So, I mean, when you get in the salt water in the ocean, it doesn't absorb all the salt, right? You would die. But it does absorb magnesium. It does absorb some things. And so it has a certain intelligence. So, so you can't do one without the other. The vitamin D deficiency and the magnesium deficiency are, they need to be understood together to a certain degree, because one is going to help the other. Like, I've done tons of research on the studies that show that when you increase the levels of one, the other levels start to become less deficient as well. And so this kind of balance there is very interesting. You can look it up yourself. The reabsorption rates, and then how magnesium also breaks down the lipid structure. Like, even the vitamin D is converted through hydroxylation by magnesium dependent enzymes that bring that sort of very fat soluble, thicker hormone that, from the keratinocytes, and then it can turn it into something which is a little more watery, more of a watery form, or semi-watery form, which is the 2,5 hydroxy vitamin D, and then that becomes a storable form. So that be stored in all the, made in the liver, and then stored all throughout the cells of the body, the fat cells. And then this can be used when needed, and I don't know, I think some studies show it's in the body for 3 months or something. It can, and then there's replacement and stuff like that. So it has a storage capacity as well. And then the body can also convert that further into the 1.25 dihydroxy D3 cholecalciferol, or let's just say vitamin D, and then that can be used as well as like the more active acute form. And so, for calcium absorption and all the other functions from the lungs on down to the immune system, vitamin D has a lot of, it's like an active principal hormone that's directing many things, including the aiming of the calcium too, and its absorption and how it's put into the right place. And there's all these keys and locks all throughout the whole path that the calcium is moving on, and so these are opening up and shutting and gating and everything else. And so magnesium plays a key role there. Magnesium also helps, buffer the calcium as well, because it's giving that calcium a little bit of its softness and less rigidity, and so that's allowing it to not harm the cells or, apoptosis and interior. It's like a natural calcium channel blocker at the cellular level, where it's going to keep that limited to a certain degree. Now, it also, magnesium does help in the breakdown of converting that, even if it's from the sun, that we get the vitamin D. It still goes through these conversion processes, and so it converts it on down through the magnesium-dependent enzymes, and that allows it to be used in the body and have the right active form. So yeah, they're connected. And what's funny is a lot of people don't know this, but this technology and workshop and alchemy is happening in the skin, actually in the skin. So that's where it's all happening. There's this conversion to vitamin D and this conversion of the magnesium-dependent enzymes. Well, that can happen once we get it down into its semi-active form. You could say its storable form in the liver. but the the meeting point of these two come together in the skin. That's where the magnesium is actually helping to uh, preserve that fat. I mean, there's another role that magnesium has that is in preservation. It's a key word for magnesium, and it has something to do with the viscosity of it and the fact that it attracts water. And so it has like a water molecule attached to it. It's 7 times heavier than other molecules, and so it has this. It has, it has this like other like a base mineral molecule, and so it's able to attract that water and bring about a certain type of viscosity, local viscosity, and then the water does its own gating effect with the hydrophilic and hydrophobic, cell transfer and membrane transfers. But so this effect that it has allows for magnesium to keep the lipid peroxidase or lipid peroxidation down. So the destruction of the fat is able to move around through with that attachment to it, that viscosity and that protection, that preservation. And that preservation is allowing not only for the noble structures, including the nerves and everything else, like the neuroplasticity of the synapses and all this stuff. This is being held together by this magnesium viscosity. This is helping kind of coat that to a certain degree, and then that keeps those noble structures intact. But then on the flip side, if it's something which is not noble, like maybe some sort of triglyceride or sugars or circulating, fats, which may be contaminated with something that needs to be chelated by another thing, or magnesium needs to attach to malate and create malic acid and reduce the aluminum or pull that down and acidify that and bring that out through like an ammonia principle back out and through the bloodstream or back out into the urine. So it will choose depending on, it's got this fat protector or fat destroyer. Like it can also take things down if need to through the speeding up of the metabolism of that structure and through its own enzymes which break that down. So it has like an active role, like a well-distributed executive. It has an active role as it's moving, but it also has this viscous preservation role. So it has like this double feature, where it's preserving or activating enzymes to take down the fat and bring it back down into water soluble through hydrolysis or whatever. So it's trying to either go one direction or the other, and that's due to its own intelligence in the body and how that works in the body. Like once it's out of the body and sitting there on the table, well, it's not actually moving in the same way, and that's the mystery of life. But these things in the body, these become markers and signals and all this stuff. So knowing this about magnesium should help you understand why we haven't overcome our deficiencies, because we haven't understood the skin. We still think that it doesn't do much, and so coming through the magnesium to the transdermal route for magnesium deficiency, and then taking that further into the vitamin D deficiency at the same time. I mean, rickets, this whole disease caused by vitamin D deficiency, they cured rickets in many studies by applying cod liver oil onto the skin. So, I mean, even there you see how the skin can take in that vitamin D and cure that disease through that skin. So that should not be a surprise. But so the vitamin D and the magnesium both work in the skin. Those acidifying processes then eventually meet with fat processes, and those things create, I guess you could say, a type of food out of those two elements, the hormone and the magnesium, and then that food is eaten by the body, if you want. That's another way of looking at it. It's made available. That metal of magnesium gets cut down into something softer where it can be absorbed, right? Instead of it just being a metal little stone in there. It's not a stone, but like a salt, but it takes that down into something assimilatable, which the body can assimilate much better and deliver better. And then magnesium plays a lot of roles in the delivery of that through the oxygen and the platelets and the hemoglobin. It plays all these roles in the shaping and the flexibility. Once again, you have the viscosity, flexibility, and preservation all put together in one word. in magnesium, and it just brings that about. Like if you have viscosity, a certain type of viscosity, not like a overly, smooth viscosity, but if you have a certain type of viscosity, and you can allow those cells and platelets to come through those veins easier, well, then you're going to have a better blood distribution, better oxygen distribution, and everything else. Magnesium is famous for its anti-glutamine, anti-sugar, I guess you could say. It takes some of the sugar out of the blood and allows that bonding that's overly sticky to become the right amount to where oxygen can onload and offload and be delivered properly. It has that kind of looseness and flexibility and preservation of viscosity that allows for that. That's what it's doing at a kind of mechanical level, but then it helps you understand magnesium as a whole. So anyway, hopefully that can help you. Come check us out at theheartoftradition.com. Get the right stuff. Don't get the fake stuff. It's only $3 a week. Make sure it's in glass and make sure it has Zechstein inside logo written on it. Otherwise, it's not coming from the Zechstein. Even the biggest brands in America, they're all Permian and ancient and whatever. They're coming from somewhere else. And so if you don't have the logo, we can't prove what's in your bottle, and there's no batch control, quality control. So it's self-certified, solvent extracted stuff that comes from Asia usually, or the Salt Lake, or heavily contaminated areas. But mostly you have to solvent extract it because it's not from the true Zechstein. And so that changes it at a molecular level. So get the right stuff. It's only $3 a week. Come check us out, theheartoftradition.com.